Ballistic NG is, according to the Steam page, and a few comments from my subscribers, a Wipeout fan game, by fans, for fans. It's free, on Steam, and even as a Wipeout fan, it doesn't grab me in its present state. To explain why, I need to talk about some subjects that may annoy. Specifically, fan elitism, whether intentional or not. I prefer to believe the latter in most cases. How it is in fact difficult to be a good game designer, and a couple of ways to detect difficulty spikes in your game that may be pulling people away. After all, a fan game is a labour of passion, often intended to draw attention to a game you feel strongly about one way or the other. In those cases, you don't want to give the wrong impression, right? So, right now, there are problems with Ballistic NG. That isn't to say there aren't good things. It visually appeals, reminding me of a mix of Excel sharpness and Wipeout 3's impressive polygon budgeting and texturing, for example. But I'm concentrating on a single, multifaceted problem with the 0.41 release: the difficulty curve. Let's mention something at this point. I love a game series called Disciples, in the same genre as Heroes of Might and Magic and King's Bounty, also games I love. I acknowledge, however, that the difficulty curve of at least the first two Disciples games can best be described as generally bullshit and somewhat random. Even with a series as niche and relatively unheard of as Disciples, there's going to be some fan who essentially will say, "Get good, scrub." Not everybody is able to acknowledge that we aren't created equal. I'm moderately good at Disciples, but shit at the FIFA games, for example. Whereas odds are relatively high, if only because FIFA is much better known and understood overall, that the reverse is true for you, the viewer. Or you could be equally unfamiliar with both, while being a dab hand at Mario Kart. Good on you. Similarly, we take different things away from the same games. I like to focus in the Wipeout LPs on the story, the track design, Actually, I'm a bit of a generalist there. Meanwhile, a pro player is going to focus on the challenging tracks, the tests, being the very best like no one ever was. Not all of them are going to understand why the earlier tracks are just as important, or even why the track challenged them so. Which leads me to my main point about Ballistic NG. The difficulty curve is skew-if, and there's both reasons and signs why. Let's look at the arcade leaderboards. Apex, second speed class, to Zen, final speed class, to get a few ideas why. So, some of these curves are acting sort of the way they should, and you could explain the low overall numbers by the fact that, well, future racing is somewhat of a niche genre. But there are two sharp drops where there shouldn't be two sharp drops, and the final track, Utah Project, is somehow retaining more players overall than the three tracks before it. I picked arcade mode, by the way, because players can switch freely between tracks in arcade mode, so even if they never finished Asinovos, the second track, they could theoretically get a leaderboard score in a different track, such as Utah Project. These drops tell us something. They tell us that there is a difficulty spike. Yes, some players play a first level and then never pick it up again. But half? Not actually as likely as you'd think. Similarly, almost 2/3 of the players don't bother with Halberd class, the third middle difficulty setting. That doesn't definitively say there's something wrong with Halberd class. But it does say that something about the experience is putting people off before they get to it. It's possible that boredom may be the answer in some cases. Vector, for example, was mandatory in Wipeout Pure, and bored me to tears. The rise in the final speed class, however, is perfectly normal. Once you get to a certain skill level with a game, nothing less will entertain. Similarly, if we look at a second graph showing what percentage of players move to the next speed class, we get an implication of how popular a track is. You'll notice this changes by speed class, mainly due to the different desires of players at different skill levels. But Hearthstone, the first track, and Utah Project, the last, don't seem to fit the overall pattern. Omega, also, is somewhat of an anomaly. The second track again shows a sharper drop-off, and one track, Ishtar, seems unpopular overall. It should also be noted that, as with the base numbers, Utah Project remains more popular than the 3 tracks preceding it. This is what the numbers are telling us, and they fit with what I'm seeing. Before the graphs, we were seeing Hearthstone footage, and the air brakes are rarely used. This fits the pattern for track design in the Wipeout games, where air brakes are not necessary on the lower difficulties of the early tracks. Now let's look at asset... Oh no. Oh dear. Too little, too late. Why the ejaculations of horror? Well, air brakes, it's true, are a concept that must be taught in a future racing game modelled on Wipeout. But there is a good way to do it, and a bad way to do it. This is the bad way. Not only are there blind corners where you do not, in fact, know for certain where you're going to end up, or sometimes even which way to turn, they are, in the most case, poorly signposted. The inspirations for this map were, judging by the nature of the turns, based on Terminal and Manatop, both Wipeout tracks with sharp, straight turns. But let's look at Manatop to see what was done there, and not here. Signpost. Signpost, signpost, signpost. It is also important to note that Manatop is the 7th track of Wipeout 3, whereas this is the 2nd track. Both are out of 8 in their respective tournaments. Let's jump to Ishtar, apparently the least favourite track, and it's immediately apparent why. No, you can do better than this. This is exactly what I mean by failing to understand why a track is good and how difficult it is. For this, we go to a track called Sol 2. Let's notice the first difference. Most of the track is walled off as well as this. The track is thin, yes, but there are decent walls. The section that isn't walled off? Not a very popular section, because it's here that even the worst level of racing AI in the game can screw you over. At least once, sometimes twice, and rarely 3 times in a row. Mines or bombs in front of you on this particular segment will throw you off the track in many cases. You respawn, you lose time, you lose position, and potentially the people you spawned behind, or the ones already long gone, could have left you a present that you drive into on respawn, and get thrown off again. Rarely it happens a 3rd time. Goodbye most of your chance for first place. Sol 2 has high walls for solid, good game design reasons. Rainbow Road from Mario Kart is often among the last tracks, if not the last track in a Mario Kart game, for a very good reason. Similar to why this is not a good idea. Blind corners, air brake chicanes in quick succession. I don't feel particularly welcome, and I'm definitely no scrub when it comes to future racing. In fact, for some bizarre reason, I'm considered the future racing guy by some people. No idea why. Not at all. If this is giving you the impression I hate the devs or the game, I don't. I mentioned that it's 0.41, which is less than halfway to finished, and I've seen some games radically change features between such a point and release. Not always to their credit, but 0.41 basically means what I've criticised has plenty of time to get better. On top of that, the control scheme for keyboard makes sense. rarer than you'd think in future racing games. I've heard positive things about the player base. I like visuals and ship designs, if not all the ships. It shows a fair amount of polish already, and the game is free. You can donate if you wish to support the developers, and if I see development, I'll certainly try. But you're not going to be spending any money, only time and a small amount of hard drive space to try it out. There's work to be done, and tracks may have to be ditched or moved to the bonus area to balance out the difficulty curve better. But accessible is not a dirty word, because it gets more folks enjoying your game and gets more folks interested in other future racing games. Go back to those tracks you loved, NG. Think about why they're placed where they are, what each one teaches, how, and how fast. You'll improve both the game and your game design knowledge if you do so. You got potential, and I would love to see you succeed. I may not be overly fond of it at the moment, but it does have potential.